From Carl Grissom, who finally redeems himself in Chicago Fire, to Denny Woods in Chicago PD, who caused a lot of damage. Here are One Chicago's 5 most hated villains by fans. Starting with Chicago Fire's Carl Grissom. Gary Cole, who played Grissom, is at the bottom of this list because he did redeem himself eventually in later appearances. Even when it looked like Grissom was going to lose his job, Kelly Severide spoke up for him. So if Severide can forgive his old friend, the audience of One Chicago can give him a break. After all, there was nothing he did that was too terrible to ever be forgiven. Still, we can't forget all the things he did before that were annoying. Remember that Otis found out that Grissom had moved up the ranks because he'd made up the numbers for his firehouse. So, he unfortunately beat Wallace Bowden in the race for fire commissioner and then made it his goal to get even with Firehouse 51. Okay, so that does sound like a bit of a gray area. But keep in mind that Jerry Gorsh, Grissom's right-hand man, was sent to 51 in order to put pressure on Bowden. Gorsh was a different kind of problem, but Grissom was to blame for him being there in the first place. Between the two of them, things at the firehouse got very annoying for a while. Benny Severide did get the commissioner to stop his attack dog, and our heroes did finally make up with their new boss. But a lot of time had passed since then. Even now, it's hard to think that Grissom won't do something else that's small or just for himself. And he isn't the only selfish villain to be hated by fans. This next one was disliked by other characters as much as he was by fans. Brian Kelton from Chicago PD. Superintendent Brian Kelton, played by John C. McGinley, was the usual bad boss when he first appeared in season 6 of Chicago PD. In many TV shows, there's someone who's better than the main character and only appears to make their lives hard. Most of the time, while acting as smarmy as possible. Kelton was the same, giving Hank Voight someone to dislike all season. And One Chicago fans felt the same way about Kelton. As he did in Scrubs and Office Space, John C. McGinley is great at playing people who are full of themselves, but also bigger than life. But that was the only thing Kelton did that was fun. Everyone, even his old friend, Catherine, Kate, Brennan, wanted him to get what he deserved. Now, you can only imagine how terrible a character has to be for everyone to wish the worst fate upon him. After Kelton's drama got her fired, Brennan ended up killing the boss she had worked so hard to get elected mayor. He may have been elected mayor, but because of her, he never did get the job. And it definitely worked out for the better, because you get the feeling that if Brennan hadn't killed him, someone else would have done it. That's how much of a pain he was. Speaking of being a pain, this next guy was so terrible that his son even went to a different country to escape him. Cornelius Rhodes from Chicago Med. Good old Dr. Connor Rhodes' father. Was there ever anything good about him? Cornelius, who was played by D.W. Moffat, was such a tyrant that Connor went to medical school in another country to get away from him. And everything I saw of him on Chicago Med showed that he was as bad as people said. Cornelius didn't want to pay for an employee's medical bills, even though the man had been hurt on the job and was engaged to Connor's sister, Christina Brucato. As if that wasn't bad enough already, he made things even worse every time he let his mouth run off. When Connor dated Dr. Robin Charles and Robin got into trouble at the department store, Cornelius made rude remarks about her. He also creepily hit on Dr. Ava Becker, even though he knew she was Connor's co-worker and that his son liked her. This was Ava's problem in the end though, because she had sex with him for money when the show found out in season 4 that she was a sociopath. Still, Cornelius was the kind of figure whose appearance made the show worse. He did nothing but hurt one of Chicago Med's most popular stars, so watching scenes with him on One Chicago was nothing but annoying. At the same time, this makes him more of a somewhat irritating intimidating obstacle than an actual evil villain, but he was still disliked well enough to be considered that. He was killed by Ava in the end, and Connor was the only one who was really upset. Cornelius wasn't the only character to be disliked for valid reasons though. Let's not forget Chicago Med's Robert Haywood. Robert Haywood, Dr. Sarah Reese's father, was not only a horrible guy, but he also took up almost half of season 3 of Chicago Med with a strange storyline that seemed more like it belonged on Chicago PD. Why did a serial killer have to be in a show about doctors? There were so many things about Robert to dislike, and only some of them had to do with what he did on screen. In canon, you saw Reese get manipulated by her father, which ruined her friendship with Dr. Daniel Charles. Seriously, that was some proper diabolical behavior. Reese even left the hospital because of how Charles acted during the Robert story. This made Rachel DiPillo the first main character to be written out of Chicago Med, which is proof of how terrible he had to be for that to happen. But the other thing that puts him so high on the list is what his entrance did for the show as a whole. Robert's story never felt like it fit in with the rest of the series. Instead, it seemed to take time away from characters and plots we wanted to see more of. He took the third season in some really strange ways, and until the whole Ava mess, he was by far the most shocking character. Definitely not. Robert might have been shocking, but he was still somewhat tolerable. This next guy though, not so much. In fact, he's someone a lot of people feel strongly about. Denny Woods in Chicago PD. Denny Woods, who's the most hated bad guy from One Chicago for a number of reasons, is at the top of this list. Denny went after Alvin Alinsky, which led to Alinsky going to jail at the end of the 5th season of Chicago PD. Even though Woods didn't kill Alinsky himself, he made it possible for the beloved character to die. Alinsky's death is still one of the saddest things to happen in the One Chicago series. But by then, Woods had become a kind of fanatic with a single goal. He first appeared in the 4th season as Voight's old partner, who had done a lot of bad things and should have been arrested. Instead, the show not only kept him from getting in trouble, but also gave him a raise. He came back as lieutenant and talked about changing the way police work. That's not all though. He then went on a one-man campaign against Voight. Woods deserved to be hated, not only for what he did to Alinsky and Adam Ruzak, who he turned into a mole, but also because he was an example of wasted potential and story twist that didn't quite make sense. The idea of a cop who did something wrong, learned from it, and then worked to change things was interesting, but it didn't happen. A storyline about change could have been great, but it turned into Wood's obsession with his ex-partner. And I'm not sure if that was the best decision taken by the show's creators. Michael T. Williamson had so much ability that could have done so much more. Voight's old partners, played by him and Mark Dacascos, are played by great actors on the show. However, Wood's character went more and more over the top and caused a lot of damage. That's all for One Chicago's 5 most hated villains by fans.